Frank Herbert's Dune is set in an expansive and complex universe, filled with intricate political structures that have built up over the millennia of humanity's existence. Part of what makes the saga truly epic is the fact that all this history acts as a backdrop for the personal story that we witness. Similar to Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, Dune really feels like the story we witness is just a moment in time, part of a lived-in world. So because Dune focuses on the story of Paul Atreides, we don't get an incredibly detailed explanation of how society is structured. So, in order to understand the state of the universe that he lives in, here are the Dune Saga's 3 powers finally explained. Okay, so there are 3 main powers in place during Paul's story: the Padishah Emperor, the Landsrod, and the Space Guild. Each plays a significant part in maintaining the structure of the Dune universe, or Duniverse as the fans call it. But first, we need to have a quick history lesson. The series is set thousands of years into humanity's future after a big war against an AI that became self-aware, which always seems to happen, and computers have been banned. That's right, from supercomputers to calculators, you aren't allowed to have a computer that thinks. So society has kind of gone backwards, both technologically and socially. Even though space travel, jetpacks, and force fields exist, humanity has regressed to a feudal system of lords who oversee territory but are themselves ruled by an emperor. So let's start at the top then with the Padishah Emperor. A hereditary title was taken by the rulers of the Corino Imperium. The Padishah Emperor is basically the king of space in the Duniverse. Now, throughout this video, I'll be drawing a lot of similarities to Game of Thrones, which also has a feudal system in place. So think of the Padishah Emperor as the king of Westeros. So the Corino house founded the Imperium and have since been the rulers of the known universe. Now the word Padishah comes from the ancient Persian word meaning master king, which is a pretty bold claim, but the thing is that by the time Paul's story is playing out, the Corino Imperium has been in charge for over 10,000 years. So I guess it's kind of earned by that point. The emperor is in charge of the strongest and most feared military force in the Imperium, the Sardaukar, and uses them to maintain his power. The Sardaukar are an elite, fiercely loyal fighting force, not unlike the Unsullied. They are trained intensely from a young age, and more than half of them die before the age of 11, although it's unlikely they have to get the same chop that the Unsullied do. The Emperor didn't appear in Part 1. However, it has been confirmed that Christopher Walken has been cast as Emperor Shaddam IV in Part 2. He hasn't been shown yet in any trailers or promotional material, but I for one am keen to have him arrive on the scene. Now, whilst the Emperor is essentially the highest authority in the series, they are still subject to influences by the other powers, which is where our next great power, the Landsrod, comes into play. Now, the word Landsrod is used in a bunch of Scandinavian languages, basically meaning land council. So, the Landsrod is basically a council of noble families who own various planets and territories. So, if the Padishah Emperor is the king of Westeros, the Landsrod is sort of the same as the Great Houses. So, where Game of Thrones has the Starks and the Lannisters, Dune has the Atreides and the Harkonnens. The Landsrod was a forum where these noble houses could negotiate trade and alliances and even engage in wars. They were ruled by a high council and overseen by the emperor. Now, the Landsrod was also a way of protecting the great houses from being singled out and destroyed by the emperor. As the emperor Sardaukar is so strong, it would take all of the great houses uniting in order to match them in strength. However, again like Game of Thrones, the Landsrod is subject to a lot of shadowy political maneuvering as a way of the houses taking out their rivals. In fact, the reason why Paul and his family are sent to Arrakis at the beginning of Dune is because the Emperor is trying to ignite a conflict between the Atreides and the Harkonnens, mainly because he is afraid of how popular the Atreides have become and is hoping that they and the Harkonnens will weaken each other by fighting. So yeah, very similar to Game of Thrones. Inter-house alliances and betrayals, political marriages and assassinations. It just has big worms instead of dragons. We've obviously seen a fair amount of the Atreides and the Harkonnens in Part 1. As far as great houses go, they are basically the most important, at least from Paul's perspective, but maybe we will get to meet some other great houses of the Landsrod in Part 2. In fact, it's possible we might see Princess Irulan, the Emperor's daughter, actually attend a meeting of the Landsrod. Now, I bet you're wondering how humans are able to travel between solar systems without computers. Well, the answer lies with the third power, the Spacing Guild. So, the Spacing Guild holds a monopoly on all space travel in the Duniverse. This is because only their navigators are able to safely chart a course through space. See, faster-than-light travel works by folding space-time, using an engine to sort of create a wormhole that allows ships to travel immeasurably long distances in the blink of an eye. But navigating these wormholes without a computer is virtually impossible, but not for the Spacing Guild. Okay, this is where Arrakis and the Spice Melange come into things. So, the reason why Arrakis is such an important planet is because it is the only place in the universe where you can find spice, which is produced by the sandworms. Now, the spice is used for a lot of different things throughout the series. One of the things it does is kind of unlocks something in the human brain, allowing them to make all the complicated calculations that a computer would otherwise do. This is called prescience, and lets the person see the past, present, and the future. It gives them the ability to basically predict the future by processing potential outcomes. Now, the Guild Navigators have been mutated by enormous amounts of spice, which is what allows them to successfully move through the folded space-time. In fact, the Navigators are described to be humanoid fish and live in tanks full of spice gas that they literally swim around in. So, it sounds like a bit of a rough gig. Now, although we did see several representatives from the Spacing Guild in Part 1, we have yet to see an actual Navigator. So maybe in Part 2, we will get a chance to meet our fishy friends. Anyway, because the Spacing Guild are the only ones who understand these techniques, all space travel is controlled by them. It's like they are the only person with a car in a world where no one lives within walking distance of anything. The Spacing Guild is what keeps the Imperium connected, and the Spacing Guild runs on spice. So being in charge of the only planet that produces spice is a big deal. Part of why House Harkonnen turned against House Atreides was because the Emperor gave command of Arrakis to the Atreides, having taken it from the Harkonnens, knowing this would spark a war between the two. This makes the Spacing Guild one of the most significant political powers in the universe. Now, I know at the start of the video I said there were 3 main powers in the Dune Saga, but that's not actually quite true. See, there is a secret 4th power pulling some very long strings. Enter the Bene Gesserit. So the Bene Gesserit are an ancient, all-women order of spies, nuns, scientists, and theologians who plant their people in all the major factions of the universe, working towards their own mysterious ends. They operate as this pseudo-religious group who influence galactic politics through their own prescient abilities and conduct constant genetic engineering through selective breeding programs. To put it simply, the Bene Gesserit are sort of like the Illuminati of the Duneverse. This secret cabal has control over everything. Paul's mother, Lady Jessica, is actually a member of the Bene Gesserit. This is part of the reason why Paul is considered to be such an important person in the world of Dune. See, the Bene Gesserit's main goal was to produce the Kwisatz Haderach, a sort of messiah-like super being with unparalleled prescient abilities who would lead humanity down what they called the Golden Path. And after the war with the AI millennia ago, is believed to be the path humanity needs to take in order to guarantee its existence. Now, the women of the Bene Gesserit have a lot of abilities. They can tell when people are lying to them, influence people through a form of hypnosis, and are some of the most skilled hand-to-hand combatants in the series. Another important ability they have is they can actually control when they get pregnant, as well as the sex of the baby, which is obviously very handy if you are part of a 10,000-year-long breeding program. When Lady Jessica was pregnant with Paul, she was supposed to produce a girl but betrayed the Bene Gesserit and had a son instead. Due to his own impressive abilities, some people believe Paul to be the Kwisatz Haderach, although that might also be because he looks like Timothée Chalamet. I know I would follow him anywhere. So with members in almost every major institution in the universe, an array of incredible powers, and an air of mysticism around them, the Bene Gesserit has got to be one of the most powerful and feared forces in the Duneverse. So there we have it. Those were the Dune Saga's major powers explained.